and go. Okay, so
Awesome.
what we're going to talk about today is I'll give you like the true definition or scientific title of it, but let me give you the keep it simple title. Stop stuffing your shit down, right? So what it's really called is what we call emotional bypassing or spiritual bypassing, and what we're going to do is we'll talk a little bit today. And Margaret and I'll have some dialogue back and forth, and you guys can certainly join in. But this is a societal generational thing that's brought down, especially for men, and we want to kind of explain it a little bit, maybe give you some ways that you do that, and then talk to you about some of the things we've already given you to release the brakes, so to speak, on yourself if you do this. And listen, everyone does this in some way. It is where you do it, how you do it, and it's another self-awareness tool to understand yourself well. Okay, what we've always told you in the grand scheme of mindset, right? And this is different than what people tell you, especially in health and fitness or anything. The true nature of success and happiness is not achieved by finding ways or reasons to be so, right? It's about releasing yourself from the reasons why you're not already, right? Or another way to say that is, it's not techniques or a new workout program or a new nutrition program to lose 30 pounds. It's releasing from the reasons why you're already 30 pounds overweight, right? It's the same thing, different scenario. We put that in business, your relationships, money, it doesn't matter. But spiritual bypassing, when you are really, I'm going to use the word hard-nosed because that's a generational term in my family, and you're a grinder and you work hard, you will emotionally bypass a lot of your bound nature, right? You'll just accept it as is and just keep going. Now, there are gifts to that. There are bad things to that. One of my gifts that I truly try not to get into anymore is I have the ability to wake up and work 24/7 till I go to bed, every day, any day of the week. And in that time, I can work out, though I'm not fully present. I can get everything I need to get done, but I'm always working. Like, I can do that. That's not good, right? There's a lot of bound nature associated with that. There's a lot of self-sabotage around that. There's a lot of explosion around that, right? And I was a classic emotional bypasser because I was taught as a male to not show emotion, to accept pain, not show it, don't cry, get yelled at, take it, move on, and keep going. And I'm sure some of that type of resonates with you in some way, whether you're a man. And as a female, I'm sure, and just in the male to female, I'm sure men have said that to you. Don't cry. Don't do this. Don't do that. Why are you acting that way? Why are you so upset? I'm sure there's those type of things. And just in truth, and in the way society talks about it, women are better at explaining their emotions. I have met women who are not. Okay, so it works both ways. In psychology today, they talk about spiritual bypassing as grasping rather than gratitude, arriving rather than being, avoiding rather than accepting. And I thought that was pretty good. We act as though acknowledging and accepting our feelings isn't allowed when we're spiritual bypassers or emotional bypassing. Even in the privacy of our own homes, like, we avoid the discomfort of our experiences and tell ourselves that for the billionth time that we should be grateful for how hard I work and what I do, and I can just grind through this and not be upset, or I can let it go, so to speak, right? In our denial and avoidance, our suffering, internal suffering, increases drastically. And that threat bucket we talk about, just keeps filling up because you've been able to expand that bucket because you've been able to, just stuff it in there further and further, and this is true. We wonder why the COVID pandemic has exacerbated mental health issues for this reason that we're going to get into. Margaret, do you have anything to say? That was a long intro. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just, the expression I use for this, are you a stuffer? Well, we're all stuffers, because if you're a venter, it's only because you're either a stuffer or a venter, right? So you're going to stuff that stuff down, but eventually it's got to come out some way.
Mm-hmm.
And because you can't hold on to it. You just can't. You can't hold on to it forever. It's an illusion. It's not real to think that it's not out of sight, out of mind. Mm-hmm. It's out of sight. It's building up. And then eventually, if you don't find an outlet for it, that's when the outbursts come, the anger come. Or in my case, it'll bypass an external behavior and it'll start manifesting as an illness, because it's got to find an outlet somewhere. That emotional energy doesn't go away.
Right.
So it's an illusion or delusional to think that you can ever bypass your emotions.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. It's one thing to be to have our own voice silenced by someone else. When like a child's yelling at you because they're upset. And our grief compared to the vastness of their own is not as bad. But it's interesting, and though we don't think this way, we are the ones most guilty of bypassing our own experiences. We are. Because we should be taking accountability, right? We tell ourselves we should be feeling rather than accepting our feelings as valid, right? We tell ourselves let's say that again. We tell ourselves we should be feeling, but we never accept them as valid feelings. Does that make sense? Like, we can say it, but we don't do it. It's like saying, well, I know I'm like my mom and my dad. You know it, you're telling yourself that, but you're not accepting the feelings that come from that and working on them. We do this because in society, we have been taught, generationally down, influenced, environment, movies, books, that sadness, anger, being depressed, all the bad bound nature, that those are somehow wrong. Like, there's something wrong with us, and that those that are perpetually happy is the way we're supposed to be, right? And that's exactly not accepting our feelings, right? We need to embrace them. We need to sit with them sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? I have this whole presentation for this, so I have some of these quotes, but there's this writer named Glennon Doyle, and he wrote the book Untamed. And when I was doing research for this just a little deeper, there's this quote. He said, "I thought that happy was for feeling and that pain was for fixing and numbing and deflecting and hiding and ignoring. I thought when life got hard, it was because I had gone wrong somewhere," right? Like it was me. Remember, those feelings we have were taught to us, right? We learned how to feel, how to take in a situation and be triggered, but we never sat with them and accepted them and understood them and peeled back the layers on them, right? Emotional bypassing is just accepting this is how I am and I'm not going to project it out, right? When we accept our emotions, it can help us. We've talked about this with Bound Nature. It helps us, when we bring it forth, it helps us move forward from prolonged suffering into experiencing our feelings so we can then pass through them and work on them and be better, right? There's not a measure to sadness or grief by which we can compare ours to someone else's, because ours are our own, right? If all emotions were valid, that they would defy comparison, right? It becomes important that we hold a space for how we really feel without apology or justification to ourselves or anyone else, right? It's so we do that so we can stop suffering and begin the processing of mindset growth.
Right.
Right? How do we do that? 4 pillars, right? Acknowledging our bound nature, understanding our bound nature, understanding when we're in bound nature, how we manage that bound nature, understanding our language around that, understanding that my language is, I have this bad language and I'm saying I don't care. That's bound nature. Accepting that I'm sad, but whatever, that's bound nature. Like, accept the language, what you say, right? Emotional bypassing, stuffing it down, it begins and ends with self. 100%.
And
You may have been taught that. You may have been taught that, but you're still responsible for it.
And back to, I just want to reiterate what Chris said. Why does it happen in the first place? It's because of judgments. It's because we've been taught somewhere along the way, culturally, from our parents, or we picked it up somewhere in our own lifetime, that a particular emotion is bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's just bad. And I actually, if you, Chris, if you don't mind, we talked about this yesterday, but I would love to share an example just because it's relevant, at least in the US, at least in the South in the US. And that is, the Christian church has taught us that certain emotions aren't like we're supposed to be full of joy. You're supposed to be full of love. You're supposed to be full of compassion. So what happens when you're not?
Right.
So you end up like kind of faking it, so to speak. Like it doesn't feel safe. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't want people to, it just puts standards there that are almost impossible for people to achieve. And it's not done on purpose, I don't think. And it's not done maliciously, but I think it's been done over the course of probably hundreds, if not thousands of years. So you end up having this culture where people can't be authentic. They can't be real with their sadness and their grief and their sorrow or their anger, because they're taught not to. So it can happen culturally. It happens. I grew up, well, New Orleans it's in the South, but it's not Southern. but in the South, in the Bible Belt in particular, that's just the area of the country I'm probably the most familiar with. We like to say, we're fine. Can I share this, Chris? Is it okay?
Yeah,
we're fine. I'm
good.
fine. I'm going to put my little Southern accent on it. I'm fine. Like if you said, how are you doing? I'm fine. It's not, you're not fine. Like it's okay. But that's, we call that the four-letter F word of the South, because what it really means is, what did I say? It was fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. But you're stuffing it behind a happy face and saying, I'm fine, when there's just so much more to the story than that. And so we want to give you guys permission to be real with how you're feeling. And the key is to not judge it. Just whatever comes up, it's okay. It really is. It's okay. It's what you're feeling. Now it may be you give yourself a timeout and go sit in a room and feel it, but don't stuff it. Don't put a block or a barrier around it. Because let me tell you what happens, and we won't, I don't think, unless Chris wants to, we're not going to really get into this, but this is what emotional eating is about.
Totally.
So when he says, get rid of the reasons why you're overweight, these are the reasons you're overweight. If overeating, if emotional eating is your issue. This is, we literally, and I wish I could recall the studies precisely, but we've learned that you in your neurology, you'll feel the emotion, but then immediately turn to a behavior, because you've bypassed the feeling, you've emotionally bypassed, but you've turned to a behavior, or you've turned to something else to try to make yourself feel better. And it may be chocolate ice cream. It may be, for some people, culturally acceptable things like working out.
Yep. Or
whatever. There are a lot of people who are in gyms working out their emotions.
Totally.
And they think, and here's the deal. That's why I call them stuffers and venters, because it's both the same root. because you can stuff, it'll eventually explode. Or you can be someone who's, I got to work out every day, because they're not stuffing, which is awesome. It's keeping them from not getting sick. It's keeping them from not having these outbursts. You know, they're not containing it until it explodes. They're just letting it trickle out every day. That's probably a healthier approach, and it's certainly a more socially acceptable approach. But it's still the same thing. Still the same route.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It is. People will say, I have to run because it helps me deal with my stress and get it out. Every day? Like, do you recognize what Margaret just said there? Like, people do that all the time. My ex-wife, classic, over happy all the time, nonstop, right? Like, we mask sadness and anger with a smile, right? That's about nature trait, right? We use gratitude to negate ourselves due to privileged circumstances, right? We look for ways to fix something without processing the damage, right? So let me give you an example, great example. You get divorced. You fixed it, but you never processed all the back end why all that stuff came out, right? That's a classic one. So kids use emotional release, like crying, yelling, and we just send them to the room and we don't process it. Like, that's a classic situation with children because they don't know how to process emotion, right? We diminish the impact of a deeply painful experience in our life. Like, for me, when I broke up with my venture capitalist company with my business, like, that was a very deeply painful experience for me that I had to process and not say, okay, I got to move on. Okay, it's done. I got to move on. There's a point you do have to move on, but you still have to process and deal with the situation. All right. What Margaret just said, we use socially rewarding ways of coping mechanisms that are acceptable so we can hide behind them. Over-exercising, know a lot of people that way. Overextending themselves as a people-pleasing concept, right? They're always helping people. They're always doing things for other people, taking away from their own life because remember, this is the word, it's distracting them from their subconscious brain and dealing with those emotions, right? Margaret said overeating. Well, how about food restriction, all right? Perfectionism, obsessing over the perfectionism because you're not dealing with the stuff underneath. Classic example, Michael Jordan. Total perfectionist. He had so much going on. He drove himself on the court. By the way, he's brilliant. Like, he has massive athletic ability in basketball. So I'm not diminishing that. What I'm saying is, if you watch this documentary, he was so exhausted all the time because of his perfectionism, and to hide it, after the game was done, he would go out all night and gamble, party, play games, just like he was totally in distraction of his life. People then maybe lack of sleep or sleeping too much, right? There's so many ways we could unwrap this for everyone. And that always comes back to where we always come from, is when our language, understanding what we're saying to ourselves and how those things come up. Like, I got to exercise again today. Boy, I really don't feel like it, but I really should, because I just got to let things go in my head, right? There's something to that. Like, we have to start unpacking that. And, Margaret said she used the Southern acronym of, what did you say? What's the word? Fine, right. So, classically, people, like, if you're having a conversation with someone, let's use the word venting, right? And someone will say, well, this person has it worse than you, so you should just let it go. Okay, but that diminishes the fact that something's really bothering you. Okay, so people do it to ourselves. They instead of hearing our pain and allowing space for us, or us hearing our pain and allowing space for us, we're silencing that our own experience, and we're bypassing it, right? The message really is twofold, that someone's giving to you and then you give to yourself. We shouldn't make people feel uncomfortable, and we shouldn't feel the way I'm feeling. But what the fuck? I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I got to deal with it. Like we need to understand that. Like when my daughter comes down and she's crying in the morning, she's sad, I don't say, stop, get back up to your room, come out when you can be happy. Like that is not, sit her down and say, it's okay to be sad. Well, why are you sad? Like, allow her to experience the emotion, to articulate it so she can get over it. If she goes up into the room and stuffs it down somewhere and comes downstairs, we haven't dealt with it, right? She hasn't experienced it. And that's just not how life works. But here's the thing, that's where that stuff starts, right? Because as adults, when it comes to children, we got so much of our own shit going on. I don't want to deal with their shit. I just need them to stop crying, because that's entering my threat bucket and overflowing my bucket even more when it's already full.
Right.
Yeah. That we, as humans, as adults, we need to experience the entire spectrum of human emotion, because if we don't know how to handle it. And of all the stuff we teach you, it's emotional awareness. Like, this is the crux of our society, of changing, of getting to where we want, of achieving, of loving ourselves, of loving other people, of living a life that we want to live. Society tells us that we're not allowed to feel that way. It's a tool that society uses as societal pressure, emotional bypassing. It's a societal pressure. We hold back tears, right? We repress our anger, but we express gratitude, but it's not how I really feel. Like, we want you to have gratitude, right? But we've also said you need to understand and express this and look at yourself in the mirror and absolve yourself from the emotion. Like, teach yourself. Like, say it's okay, get through it, so you absolve it, goes away, right?
Yeah. And just think of, I like to think of an inbox at work. In fact, I'm sitting next to a desk here and I've got this, well, yeah, I won't show you, but the tools we're teaching you now are so that as paper comes in, you can get it done and move it forward. But then once you get good at that process, what you're going to realize is there's actually a lifetime of papers, for some of us anyway, of unprocessed papers. But okay, we've now learned the process. So as we get good at not having new things pile up, we can actually start working on the backlog. And I want to share, if this is a good time, I want to share a little technique or tool that I kind of stumbled upon on my own, maybe I forget the years, long time ago, but it was really helpful and powerful. And I've dubbed it Face and Feel, because what I learned is we remember, you have thoughts, you have actions, you have actions and behaviors, you have a physiology, but then you also have emotion, an emotional response. So I'm a math person, right? Let's get rid of all those other variables. Can you sit still and be still? And as thoughts come in, this is part of why meditation is popular, or you think of those monks or whatever who can just sit there for hours and be still, because what's happened is they've mastered these emotions. Because how many of us have sat there and all of a sudden, we're fidgeting with our hands, or maybe our legs are restless leg syndrome, tap, 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 or thoughts racing or whatever. But if you can sit still, and for some of us, it's really hard to clear our minds of thoughts. Okay, fair enough. But at a minimum, can you keep your body still? For some of us, that's really hard to do. But let's say your leg is twitching. We'll just use that as an example. Stop twitching your leg, like be conscientious about, I'm not going to move my body. What is that leg twitching? What emotion is that leg twitching bypassing? And actually by forcing yourself to sit still, you actually give and tell yourself, hey, I want to know what this underlying emotion is. What's hiding under tell your body that's what you're trying to do. And then all of a sudden that emotional energy may come up, and then you'll actually get to experience, and here's the kicker, allow yourself to feel whatever comes up. No judgment, no hiding it, no restuffing it. and I don't know how they figured it out. I've read different sources on this. Some people say 80 seconds, some people say 90. The bottom line is it's about a minute and a half. If you can do that, it really only takes about a minute and a half. Think about plucking a guitar string. You know, you pluck it and it makes a sound and it vibrates and then it dissipates. That's all you're waiting for it to happen. You're waiting for that sound to come up and out, and then it will eventually go away. And then guess what? It's actually gone forever. It's gone forever. It doesn't, unless you stuff a new one. But that one that has been there in the background as a trigger, disrupting your physiology, just causing you to behave certain ways that you haven't even realized you've been behaving, creating thoughts in your head that you didn't even know were related to that emotional energy. That was the little fuel supply for all these other things, the driver for all these other things. And you've given it a chance to get up and out. But another way I've applied this is to be still. Where am I? And this was a biggie for me because I was sick. Where am I feeling the pain right now? I'm like, this happened to me the other day. I started to feel like my shin hurt. I'm like, wow, I don't remember hitting my shin, but I just sat there and I that's why I call it facing and feeling, because I turned my attention to my shin, and then all of a sudden this emotional energy came up, and I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that was in there. Ancient or Eastern cultures do have an understanding that different organs will house different emotions. You know, your liver will house anger, your heart and lungs will harbor grief. I've since learned from trial and error myself that that's actually true. So be still with yourself. You know, just close your eyes if you have to. If you find yourself fidgeting, stop fidgeting and try to see what emotions pop up. And the key is don't judge it and allow yourself to feel it. And if it's centered on a part of your body, you can do it with a pain or a discomfort. Focus your attention on that spot and see what comes up. And there's some things that literally I cleared right away, and some took, you know, a couple weeks of sessions, so to speak, you know, 5-10 minutes at a time, just working through it. And it's a fascinating process if you haven't tried it yet. But anyway, that was long. I'm sorry.
I mean, the truth is there's no way to measure grief, right? Or any of those bound nature thoughts. And to hold it side by side to someone else's and mark one as valid more than the other's invalid, you just can't do that, right? That's why the self-awareness that we teach and the emotional awareness and increasing your emotional IQ is just, it's important for you, right? Bound nature doesn't require comparison because all that matters is how it affects you, right?
Yeah. And I want let me add really,
yeah.
Sorry, that's good. No, we've taught you that your thoughts, every bound nature, every free nature, you have a thought related to it, a behavior related to it, a physiology related to it, and an emotion related to it. So you can follow any one of those into the other. Like you can follow a thought into your behaviors. You can follow a thought into a part of your physiology. You can follow a thought into your emotions. And conversely, you can do that with all the others. My emotions will drive certain thoughts. Like it's like a little invisible webbing underneath the surface for all of them. One of the reasons I particularly like this topic is because I personally have found, and I actually do a form of energy work as it's a hobby, but business hobby. I love doing it because it clears things out. It's the thought will create, if the thought and the judgments attached to that will create the stuck emotional energy. But once it's stuck in there, oh my gosh, it's just a huge driving force. So if you can get rid of it, it clears things out so quickly. Mm-hmm. It's just huge. So you can come at it from all kinds of angles, But I find you get a ton of bang for your buck by working at the emotional piece of it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I could keep going, but I'll stop.
You can keep going. Of course you can.
I really do. I love helping people figure this piece out because, again, you can't, it's hard to think beyond how you feel. And
Mm-hmm.
how you feel is dictated by this emotional energy that you've suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're all about trying to get you to think greater thoughts, right? Have a greater belief system about yourself. And so you have to do the mindset work. There's no question about it. No question about it. But what really kickstarts the mindset is working at the emotional level, trying to, just working at this emotional bypassing. Because if you can figure this out, you're most of the way there.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, as I teach this even, and I think about it, everyone's an emotional bypasser until they get someone like us to make them understand. And I say that, not that people stuff everything in, is that we just accept ourselves as is, okay? And when I react to something, I say, well, that's a non-negotiable for me. That's a red flag. I don't like that. My mom did that to me all the time. Like, in a way, we're not sitting with our emotions and understanding it. Like, we're not holding space for that emotion. We are, just as a critical reminder with Bound Nature, it's intensely emotional and reactionary when we get that way, right? We need validation and recognition, right? We live in a comparative society. We are either, most of us live, because we've been taught, we live superior to everyone or inferior. And if we're inferior, we try to prove ourselves. If we're superior, like, there's so many different ways. Like, we get cynical and angry of others because we judge, right? We're jealous, we get envious. And fear, we've talked to death about fear, and we're going to talk to death about it more. Sometimes we're over analytical, we overthink, which leads to overwhelm, and then we worry, right? These are Bound Nature points that you need to hold space for for yourself, right? And if we had to give you a few techniques to think of that we've taught, and we'll teach again, one is object versus self-referral, okay? And our success and happiness for object referral is tied to stuff, okay? Letters after your name. Yep. You need them because they make you feel superior. People look at them and like, whoa, right? Like, they put you on a pedestal, maybe. We tie our happiness to the outcome of success. Weight loss. How many people do you know get excited when they've lost 30 pounds? Like, I get it. It's good. It's good. But when it like changes your life, that's great. But you have to unpack that. Why is that such a big deal? Like, why are you tied to a number, right? Especially when you're tied to the number on the scale and it's not moving, and you don't lose the weight you want to lose. What happens then, right? Money stories. A big one, romantic love. Like, we're going to do a whole talk on avoidance, anxiety anxious avoidance and stuff in terms of relationships, and why we need to get away from diagnosing ourselves as having these things when we can use the tools we have to work through our stuff. And I'm going to use myself as an example and let you understand how I learned that from my parents and what that meant, how I've experienced relationships in the past and come forward, because it's a big learning experience for myself. But I don't diagnose myself with something wrong with me. I have already taught my experiences and how I've worked through them. But I want you to see how a diagnosis from a psychologist can really change your mindset and send you on a spiral, right? Because you don't want people to think that. Like, you see a psychologist or a psychiatrist and then you diagnosed with this. What we want, right, is self-referral, right? I want to sit with Margaret and express my emotions and not be triggered if she says, she wouldn't do this, by the way, says, well, get over it. There's starving people in Africa. You don't need to lose 10 pounds. Okay. She would never say that, but like, I'm okay with myself to sit with my own emotions and be okay with them. And if someone says something at me that I know is their bad nature, I don't take it personally. Right. So we need to detach from that, from all, right?
Yeah.
In the moment of living, like living with ourselves, we need to know when bound nature spikes for ourselves, so we can manage it. We've talked a little bit about that, how we use bound nature 911 to self-regulate our daily emotional landscape. We need to basically bring awareness to where we are today, like right now for yourself, and focus on the now. Like, where are you now, today? Not next week, 5 years, or 20 years from now, today. Not 5 years previous or 10 years previous, today. What am I going to do today that's going to eventually get me to my intentions and my goal that I need, that I want for myself? Like, that's big. The object and self-referral landscape of teaching, for me, was a game changer for me as a people pleaser. Because I learned that my frustration in business, in relationships, whatever, I was always trying to prove myself. So someone said something to me to make me feel better about myself because I did something for them. Right. And that was completely wrong. I wonder where my relationships would be today if I had known that teaching 20 years ago. Like, where would I be sitting today? Would I be divorced? Would I have had a bad breakup in business? I don't know. But I know that I am better today because of that. And how I receive compliments, more importantly, I can give them now without thinking I need something back. That is huge.
Right.
There's a lot of people give compliments needing something back quickly.
Right.
Right. And there's an energetic property to how you say things. When someone says it, you know inherently they're searching for something for themselves. Once you understand yourself. Right? The past is just a collection, of moments that have happened. They're learning experiences. They're our teachers. They're our best friend, right? The future, it's just the future. We don't know what's going to happen, right? So we don't need to worry about that as we go forward. The only true power we have is creating the life we have today. So tomorrow, I'm a little bit better than I was today. But if I focus on today and the things I need to do today, focus on myself, my language, my emotional status, my emotional awareness, and how I can move through that and work through it, then tomorrow's going to be better, right? It's just a moment.
Yeah. And I want to jump in here because I think what you just pointed out was brilliant. What we want, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we talked about kind of untethering some of these things from our past. So I like pictures, I like analogies. So if I'm here today, let's say this is my past and this is my future. If I have all these experiences in my past, and we all have them, most of them are, let's say, fine, but there's going to be those that are really emotionally charged. Like if I go back and look at that experience, like, oh my gosh, I remember that I was so embarrassed. And if you're still feeling embarrassment in that moment, for example, or, oh my gosh, I remember when they did that, I'm still mad. If you're still feeling that emotional charge, you have an invisible tether to that experience. We want to be able to look back on it and honor it. It is what it is, to kind of be able to stay neutrally present, emotionally neutrally present, and not get triggered. So if we are, it means there's still this connection there. So that would also be a way you can sit with the memory and try to allow yourself to today feel what you didn't allow yourself to feel then because of judgment, because of fear of rejection, or whatever it was. Because here's the deal, if you can't get rid of those tethers to your past, they will act like a bungee cord preventing you from moving towards your future. It's like you've got little bungee cords, and you're working hard trying to create your next life and your next day, your next year, your next decade, or whatever. And you just feel like something's pulling you back. And the answer is because it is. you gotta cut these cords so that it frees you up to move in the direction you want to move in. And how does all this happen? Emotional bypassing. The reason you have these little connections to your past, these past memories, past experiences, is because you judged how you were feeling and you shut it down. You either stuffed it, you bypassed feeling it. You bypassed feeling it by either stuffing it or by venting it. Venting it through eating, venting it through exercise, venting it through watching a movie, venting it through playing video games. Whatever you did, it's fine. We all do it. But now that we're getting healed and whole and more self-aware than we've ever been, we have an opportunity to go back and feel it. And we really, I personally don't know a lot of ways around it. I mean, I know a few, I should say, but at some point you actually just have to say, this is how I feel. I'm going to own it. I'm owning my junk. This is how, and allow yourself to feel it. And it won't last forever. It won't last forever. Feel the shame. If you're feeling shame, feel the shame, feel the grief, cry if you need to, whatever you need to do. But own the emotion and not judge it. And then it'll come up and out. And then the beauty of that is you actually can be happy and be joyful and be all these things, and it's authentic. Then you're not faking it. You know, someone asks you how you're doing, you can say, I'm fine. And you actually really mean it. You know, you're not just faking it. So I do want to say there is an authentic expression of joy and happiness that, but you not through bypassing, because that's not helping anybody out.
Right. It's important because when we are trying to fake it, okay, you fall into that object referred scenario. Okay. This works perfectly where I was leading, because when we do that, you know, we've talked about this before. Let me remind you, there are three phases of object referral. Okay. Remember, there's the pretender, the rebel, and the failure. Okay. And so let me just remind you, in this aspect, the pretender could be someone who acts outwardly happy and successful because they're not dealing with their stuff that's inside. This is how they've masked their bound nature, right? Or they're inwardly terrified of failure or disappointing. So they outwardly act happy, right? This was me for a long time in business. You live in fear of being found out, so you act smarter than you think you are, right? Or you avoid the situations where you could be found out, right? You put yourself in a situation where you have to continuously wear or maintain the mask of the pretender, right? You become perfectionistic, or you procrastinate a lot, okay, because you don't want to fail, because you're at the object referred response from other people, you're worried about it, or competition, you stay away from competition. If we look at the rebel, you know, you're pretending that opinions don't matter. That's classic emotional bypassing right there, right? You constantly have this anger inside of not being good enough, but you don't deal with it, right? So do you guys see how all this connects? It all connects together, right? These are bound nature traits, by the way. You know, you need to prove the criticism doesn't bother you. You're emotionally bypassing how you feel, right? You blame others so you don't have to deal with it. Or you break rules because you feel like you need to show off or try to prove someone else wrong so the people aren't looking at you. You fight authority. I mean, we could keep going, right? So, and then the failure, right? You know, acts helpless or unable to cope. Someone come save me, right? For attention, right? There's people you probably said that's what they do. Or they sit there and they wait to be rescued by someone, right? You know, laying on the ground, arms flailing, not literally, but, you know, they live in constant self-pity of themselves. They look for guidance from everyone nonstop. Classic right now, coaches online buying the newest technique on site to help their business because they haven't dealt with their own stuff inside of why they cannot continue to complete task every day, simple and consistent, or you are learning a mindset growth company or program and you go find another book and stop the program and go do another book, then read another book, then go to a seminar, right? You are constantly trying to find the aha moment in your life. And that's object referral, right? You can be a combination of them, but what we want to express is that emotional bypassing has so many levels in different areas of your life. You just have to ask yourself and sit with the emotion, listen to your language in the morning, and that's why that pillar is the deconstruction of your mindset, why it's so important for us. Any thoughts, Margaret? Oh, I lost her. Okay.
Oh, I'm back.
Okay. So,
Sorry.
like really, it's about maintaining a balance, right? You need to have self-love. You need to practice self-love through the four pillars. So you start having boundaries within yourself, which then translates to other people. You need to have your own personal emotional involvement with yourself. You need to have, we've said this a lot, compassion for yourself, that you have an emotional need and you have emotions, and we need to understand what they say because they are your best friend. They are not your enemy. They help you and they signal to you when something's going on. And that's important, right? So you're empathetic to yourself, not sympathetic, right? Don't get into the sympathy, go down the hole type of thing. Be empathetic and compassionate to deal with it, but don't get into the sympathy hole, right? And don't form conclusions, right? Don't form conclusions on yourself. Just work through it. There's no definitive. It is what it is. And next week, it may be a little different. It may be a little deeper. Or it may not be what it is. It may be found something else. But the fact is you're working and you're not concluding. Because when we conclude, we stop seeking. We always need to be seeking. Mm-hmm. Okay? Woo! This might be my favorite talk ever. I don't know why, but it ties in so much of what we've talked about.
It's because it's the foundation of everything. If people didn't emotionally bypass, you wouldn't have any bound nature traits to work with. They just wouldn't exist. You know, they exist because we've hijacked the process at some point in the way, and we hijack it through judgment. And so at some point you got to go back and bring that stuff back up. That's why the four pillars work. If you find you can't, I'm going to sound like a broken record on this. Chris knows this is my favorite pillar, but the counting wins. If you find that this is really hard to sit with your emotions, just spend a season, days, weeks, whatever, just really honing in on the counting wins, the gratitude, the appreciation, however you want to word that, because that gives you the resiliency to be able to go back and face some of this stuff. Because when I was first learned the concept of trauma bucket, it was presented to me, exact same thing, but it was presented to me as a joy capacity. So think about it that way. You can either view it as you know, filling up your trauma bucket or increasing your capacity to experience joy. It's the same concept, just flipping the language, a little different way to do it. And how do you build that joy capacity? How do you increase that trauma bucket? Actually, by practicing the gratitude, practicing the appreciation, practicing looking for the wins in your day. So if you want to get better at this process, or if you're finding you're not really able to do that, the other piece, just practice increasing that trauma bucket. Mm-hmm. Then go back and face all this emotional stuff that we've been avoiding our whole lives. So that's just another little tip I've learned for myself, is sometimes just, hey, push pause on maybe the language for a couple of days or a week and really just focus on the wins. Mm-hmm. If that's what you need. That may be a tool for some people.
It is a great tool because there's different levels of your of your journaling experience yourself. So you become a beginner, intermediate, advanced, and superhero. And at some point, sometimes you have to stop learning your language and really get into the restructuring process after you get really good at your language. But what, if I could leave this one comment for today, and we can revisit on the next talk because we got to jump off. But classic emotional bypassing is when you sit with yourself and you think you have nothing to work on, when you think everything's great and there's nothing there. That in itself needs to be peeled apart. Why? That right there. Just ask yourself why. I'm good. I got everything in my life under control. I'm perfect. I'm not sad. Just stop right there and just, why is that? Where did you learn that? Why? How are you perfect? There's no perfect. We're perfectly imperfect. Okay?
On that note,
we're out. That was amazing. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. If you can join us, great. If not, we'll post. Love you guys. Thanks for your time. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.